Currently, the background of Bullseye is the default plain white, but in Luke's design he calls for subtle gray for the background color. In the previous video, you learned one way of setting the background of a view, using the background view modifier. Let's start by trying that out and seeing if that works for us in this case.
I'd like to set a background color on the content view. So the first thing I might think as a way to solve this is, well, what is our content view? Our content view just has a VStack, so why don't we try setting a background of the VStack? So just let's think about where we should put this, because the curly braces can be confusing. So this curly brace matches up to content view. The second closed curly brace closes out the body, and then this third curly brace closes out the VStack. So if we want to apply a view modifier on the VStack, this is the place where we would put it. So here we'll put in background and we'll put in color.gray. So we see a background of gray, but it's not what we might expect because we wanted it to be gray across the entire screen, but it's only gray about this area. And why is that? And that's because SwiftUI views are smart when it comes to layout. They size themselves based on how big they need to be to fit whatever you put inside that view. So for example, this label here, 25, is sized big enough to fit the text 25 when you size it at that font size with that font weight and everything else. Same thing with this label here. It's figured out, oh, I need to be tall enough because I need 3 lines of text given the constraints you've put on it, and so on. And this even applies to the VStack itself. It sizes itself big enough to fit all of this stuff in size, but no larger. So there's another way that we can apply a background here. And what we can do is we're going to embed this VStack inside a ZStack. So a ZStack is like a VStack or a HStack in that it stacks things, stacks other views together, but in a Z order. So you can think of Z as a negative Z value would be like far away in the background, and a positive Z stack would be in the foreground, but they're all stacked on top of each other. So we can put something in the background that's the gray color, and then in the foreground we can be it's a VStack we've already created. And when you put like a color as a view, the color just takes all the space that's available to it, which would be the entire screen. So long story short, let's try this out. There's a couple ways we could do this. We could type in ZStack like this, and then just make sure we put the other curly brace in the right spot. But I want to show you another shortcut which can make it easier, especially when you're dealing with so many curly braces and making sure you're getting things in the right place. If you hold down Command and click on VStack, you'll see a little helper here, and one of them is embed in ZStack. So if I click that, it'll automatically create a ZStack for me and make sure to indent everything and add the curly brace in the correct spot and so on. It's just a little bit easier. And then at the top of the VStack, we can put in color.gray like so. And now it's almost fixed it. We have a gray that takes up most of the space, except we're not including this top area right here. And the reason that is because this is what's called the safe area. Apple's trying to prevent you, if you're not meaning to cover this area, because that's where things like the battery indicator and other things go. And if you had some important text you wanted the user to see, you might not want to fill that space. But for a background, we actually do want it to go behind that area. So I'm going to add in under view modifier here. Another thing I want to show you is when you can't find something in here, you can just start typing up here and it will search for it. And I happen to know what we're looking for starts with edges. So I've typed in edges and it finds edges exploring safe area. So I can just drag that in, and actually just leaving in the default is perfect. And so now the gray extends all the way through.
You've already learned how you can use Apple's built-in colors like blue, white, red, green, and so on. But Apple hasn't made a predefined color for this exact gray that we're looking for, so what should we do in this case? Well, there are 2 ways you can do this. You can create your own color and code, or you can create your own color using the Xcode Asset Catalog. Let's start with the first method, which is to create your own color and code.
If we load up Luke's design and click on one of these elements like Bullseye Concept 1, we can see that the background color in hex is this value right here. So I'm going to take that hex value, and I want to get the RGB value for it. So I have a little cover. I just searched for this online, but I also put a link to it in the author's notes. And this allows me to paste in a hex value like that and click convert, and I get the RGB values here. Let me just copy this so we can use this as reference in a minute. All right, so we can use RGB colors instead by typing in color, and I'm going to choose this one here that says red, green, blue opacity. Some of these parameters are optional, so I'm going to delete the opacity in that first one, which are optional. And I'm going to put a comment here just so we can see it of these values. So the first one is red. And it turns out that Swift wants red, green, and blue not as numbers from 0 to 255, but from 0 to 1. And so we have to convert the range. And the way we do that is by saying, and they also want them in double, not integer. So 243.0, and then we have to divide it by 255.0. That converts it from the range of 0 to 255 to 0 to 1. And then I'm just going to paste these 3 times. And this next one's 248. And the final one is 253. Now I can delete that reference there. All right, so that's how you can get colors using RGB values in Swift.
We've seen the first way to create a custom color, create it in code. Now let's look at the second way to create a custom color, which is to use the asset catalog. The asset catalog is a special file that's included in your Xcode project that you can use to store the images, colors, and icons that you need for your app. Each time you add something to your asset catalog, you give it a name, like you see circled in red here, and then in your code it's easy to refer to that item by its name. The reason using the asset catalog is better than hard coding the color is now you can easily reuse the same color throughout your entire app without having to hard code the same value in multiple different places. That way, if you need to change that color later on, you can do it in just one place. Using the asset catalog for colors has one other big benefit, which you'll learn about in the next episode. But first, let's convert this color from hard-coded to using the asset catalog.
The asset catalog we earlier moved into the app group. So if we expand the app group and open up assets.exe assets, this is our asset catalog. This is where we can add icons, images, colors, and so on. Well, we want to add a color, so click on the plus and choose color set. And we're going to call this background color. And you want to make sure your attributes inspector is open. If it's not, click this button on the right. And change appearances from any dark to none, because for right now we just want a single color. And then select the color. And then in the input method here, you want to change that from floating point to 8-bit hexadecimal. This is convenient because it allows us to paste in the hexadecimal value from the Figma design. So I'll open up the Figma design again, and I'm just going to copy that background color, switch back, and paste that in. And you can see that the color's updated now. And now we can go back to contentview.swift and delete this code where we were manually typing in the red, green, blue values, and instead, in between the parentheses of color, we can just, in quotes, put the name of the color in our background, in our asset catalog. So we typed in, remember, background color. And then I'm going to hit Command B to build and Command Option P to refresh the preview, which was stopped. And it looks like we still have the nice blue background color that we had before. While we're talking about the asset catalog, I wanted to point out the 2 other things that you see in here. There's the accent color. This is a color used by certain controls to give them a little bit of splash of color. So one of the controls that uses this is the slider. So if we look at Luke's design, he has a nice color here, red, that he's using for the slider. So we can go inside the accent color and select this. And I'm going to change this from none to sRGB. Change this to 8-bit hexadecimal and paste in that value, and now we got the nice red color. So back in contentview.swift, again, I need to refresh the preview with Command Option P. And we can see that we now have that accent color showing up on the slider. And there's some other controls as well that use that accent color, but this is exactly what we want for right now. I also want to point out one of the big things you might have noticed. So Luke made this really pretty thumb track for the slider that I really would love to use in this app, but unfortunately, currently in the current build of SwiftUI that we're using, there's no way to change the thumb track on the built-in SwiftUI slider. You could probably make your own type of slider that would do that, but you can't with the built-in slider, unfortunately. So we're not going to be able to implement this right now, but I wouldn't be surprised if that feature will be coming in maybe a future update of SwiftUI, but we can't do that right now. So we're going to stick with the default thumb track. The other thing I wanted to point out to you about the asset catalog here is there's one more thing that's in there, which is the app icon. And actually, at the very end of this course, we'll be setting that app icon, so don't worry, we'll be covering that too later on. All right, so I want to add another color to the asset catalog, and it's for the button color, because we were using the hard-coded color .blue, but that's not exactly the color Luke is using here. So I'm going to copy this color right here, and we'll add that in. So I'm going to click the plus color set and name this button color. Again, I'm going to set appearances to none, click the color, change it from floating point to hexadecimal, paste in the color, and now we got that blue color. Now we can go back to content view.swift, scroll down here to where we were using color.blue, and instead put color button color. And Command Option P to refresh the preview. And you may notice this is a slightly more purplish, I guess, color button, which looks nice, a lot more like Luke's design.
There's one more thing I want to show you before we move on. If you look at Luke's design, the button still isn't right because Luke has applied a subtle gradient to the button. A gradient is a fancy way of saying a range of position-dependent colors. In this case, Luke is calling for a gradient that goes from a white that's 30% transparent at the top to a fully clear color at the bottom of the button. This gives a subtle but nice effect. Our strategy here will be to expand our background of the button a bit. Instead of just having the background be a color, we'll have it be a Z-stack. The Z-stack will contain the blue background and then a linear gradient, which will be on top of that background. Let's give this a shot.
Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to make a little spacing around the color. I'm going to hold down Command, click on Color, and I'm going to say Embed in Z-stack. Then I'm going to open up the library, make sure I'm on this first tab here, and I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom where there's a paint section, and there's one called Linear Gradient. And we're going to drag that in. We're going to drag it so it's above the V-stack, which means after the V-stack. So I'm going to click on Gradient, and for the first color, instead of color.red, we're going to replace that with color.white. And then we're going to hit a dot after that to set the opacity on that white color, and we're going to set that to 0.3. And then for the second color here, instead of color.blue, we're going to do color.clear. Now, currently the gradient is going from left to right because the default is leading and trailing. We're going to replace that. So the starting point will be the top, and double click the ending point, and the ending point will be the bottom. And check it out, we now have a nice subtle little white gradient that goes from the top of the button to the bottom of the button. That makes it look a little nice and pop off the screen a little bit more.